Hello Internet, I'm Jackie Fox, this is Fox Talks, and I welcome you to my 1,000 subscriber special episode, which is going to be recorded live. As you will notice, I have been actually growing my hair out the entire pandemic. Did get a little bit of undercutting done, which you can't see. During the summer it got really hot on my neck, so I just buzzed up a good ways and trimmed some of my sides. But other than that, it's been growing out the whole pandemic and I love it. So there's something a little bit personal, and we're going to do a little bit more of the personal stuff in this episode instead of world news and opinion and that kind of thing. So let's talk about the last year, because 2021 was not great for me. I had a lot of family stuff to deal with. My mother has been homeless for about 2 years. She's been living with me most of the time, which has taken a lot of my attention. And there's been a lot of coordinating, especially in this housing market, the 2021 housing market. If you know anything about how trash fire that is, that's made it very time consuming and difficult for me to get her into a home. Thankfully, unlike probably a lot of people who are having trouble with the housing market during this time, we were able to pull it off, and I got her into a house in December. But if I can be vulnerable here for a moment, I kind of turned off my life goals there for a bit to help her, and I gave myself fully to that process. And I can't lie, man, it's been kind of depressing to get out of that, because you've given your life to such a clear focus and then it's over, and you have this feeling of well, what the fuck do I do now? And it's difficult to get back into the things that I was doing before. One of those things being running this YouTube channel. But I am, at least in this video, making an honest effort, because it's not quite like riding a bicycle. There's a lot of work that gets involved in making a single YouTube video. That's in part why this video is going to be live. One, because I think that is more honest. It's not scripted, it's not recorded, it's not something I'm going to be editing the hell out of. I may edit out some ums and pauses, but other than that, this is me. This is who I am. But also it's easier to edit, so this gives me kind of an entry point into getting back on this channel. I don't think I'm going to be doing any more stuff on sex work. I know that series is very popular. It's probably a big part of why I am at 1,000 subscribers right now. But the thing is, there's not much else for me to talk about unless something comes up, like the OnlyFans story, which I am going to talk a little bit more about in a bit. Because other than just, having to get back on the bicycle and start pedaling, which hopefully I'm doing a decent job of right now, the other thing that's really kept me from making content is that spending a lot of time sitting alone with the media, you start to realize how bullshit it is. Even the parts that you like of the media, even the people that you think are closest to telling the truth, they still have their biases, and sometimes it shows in the selections they make for things that they want to talk about, or how upset they get about them, because they're performative outrage is a thing that is big, and maybe they are outraged. Maybe these things seriously do piss them off. Maybe it's just that I don't see the reasoning, and I think that it's performative. But people getting upset about mask mandates and stuff, I just think it's ridiculous. Even if you try to make a good argument for it, it's a fucking mask. It's not that big a deal. And that makes it really hard, especially with the OnlyFans story really illustrating this point in my head, because I had seen that story from several different people that I watch on a regular basis. And let me walk you through the takes. Maybe I'm gonna throw some people under the bus for this, and hey, no hard feelings. I still watch both of these channels now. I don't have any hard feelings to them. People are imperfect, and the way that our media ecosystem runs, if you aren't incredibly skeptical all the time, which is a really tiring place to approach everything from, especially if you are in kind of in the business of reporting on things as they happen, then you can miss the big story by getting the loudest part of the story, right? And the loudest part of the OnlyFans story was definitely this backlash of how can this billion-dollar porn company stop selling porn? This is crazy. This doesn't make any sense. And that was effectively the way that Internet Today approached it. They don't do a tremendous amount of research. There are some subjects that they are very well versed in because they've been doing this for a while, so they remember old news and they can put things in context sometimes, and I really appreciate that. But mostly it's just entertaining. Like, I don't know if other people had this. I remember there was like a local newspaper or something that I would always read like page 3 or something of, because there would be this section in there that was called Weird News that would just be like, burglar steals $100,000 worth of stuff from guy's house, leaves his wallet with over $100,000 in it, or something like that. Just weird news you wouldn't expect. Recently, they did an episode that was in part on a woman selling fart NFTs. So, it's certainly more entertaining news, but like, I think like a lot of the other sources that I could mention here that I do respect and watch, Internet Today typically, kind of reads the headlines instead of researching stories, which is more what I'm into. And this, this story has really pushed me even further in that direction. The other viewpoint that I got on it was Breaking Points, and they were kind of following a line that they usually do. And I'm not saying that this is like completely incorrect. This is a factor in the bigger story, and they did bring it to this story. So they did do the research to find this, but they made this story more about, these banking cartels are moralizing and trying to tell this company that it can't be smutty, right? And that sounds bad. Like, if you don't take either of those points with the BBC article, you don't understand the full picture, and you get a misleading representation of it when you report it. And essentially, I think that whole angle that they were reporting, this fascinating story about $1 billion porn company turning off the porn, is just manufactured to be a more sensational story than what is really happening with stuff like trafficking and the just absolutely piss-poor moderation of OnlyFans. And because that is such a more compelling story, people have monetary incentive to cover that story. In fact, I had just gotten off of, talking about a bunch of these platforms, and I immediately wanted to do this story because I was like, wow, tons of people are going to watch this because, holy, what the fuck? Why is OnlyFans doing this? Everyone must be desperate to know. And I wanted to make that story immediately based on just those 2 points of view. But I said to myself, let me do some research. Let me ask some people that I know what they've heard about this story. Like, at the very least, it might help me figure out what people want to know. And I asked a couple people, and somebody actually said, oh, well, there's more to that story. Here's a link to an article from BBC. And holy shit, there was more to that story. And And I'm going to do probably a series on my issues and the flaws in our corporate media especially, but in media in general, in even flaws that affect people like me, even small-time YouTubers. But one of them is that it's so easy for a PR company to take a story and inject it into the news cycle and have that dominate, because it's a manufactured story that's meant to sell. And of course, if your main desire is to make money, then of course you're going to pick the story that's easy to sell, and then that can obfuscate or provide cover for other stories that might be damning for that company. And the OnlyFans story is a perfect example of that. But this kind of thing happens all the time. It happens especially often with like the military. Like, oh my god, do y'all remember the reaction to when Biden bombed like 10 civilians? The Biden administration, not like Biden specifically, but like he didn't stop it. He has, especially when compared to Donald Trump, ratcheted down the number of drones, and he got us out of Afghanistan. Are we trying to start a shadow war in Ukraine? Even against the recommendations of the Ukrainian president, who just like, he's like, this help is not helping. You're inflaming this war, and it doesn't need to be. But there was an interesting piece in Breaking Points recently that showed a couple of these articles, pro like war in Ukraine articles coming out of Politico, that were bought and paid for by Lockheed Martin, who is a major weapons manufacturer that would profit tremendously from a war in Ukraine. So, we see that even a respectable, even like a real news kind of media organization like Politico will bow to money and write whatever moneyed interests want them to write if the price is right. So we have to be especially careful when we're consuming these, because not all of them say up top paid for by Lockheed Martin. We have to be really careful. And I, who view a lot of people who are reporting on things as they come out, you know, basically bringing headlines to me so that I don't have to search for the headlines. And, you know, if you watch a wide enough variety, you're going to get a lot of things. I try to keep some, you know, usually through like variety shows like Breaking Points or The Hill, try to keep some like relatively reasonable conservatives in my news-sphere, entertainment sphere. I don't often agree with them, honestly, or sometimes I'll agree with them just a little bit or say, hey, you got a good point there, but you're taking it a little overboard. But I think we should be critical with everyone on that level. And it's also helpful for me to see these viewpoints expressed on Rising and Breaking Points, because those are shows that have not necessarily a confrontational dynamic. Usually the hosts find ways to agree with each other, but, you know, if you say something completely off the wall on either of those shows, the other host will at least say like, well, you know, I don't think you're crazy, but here's how I see it, and, you know, provide a grain of salt to that. So I think I think both of those channels are very good for being able to see conservative talking points taken with a grain of salt. It's exactly what people wish Joe Rogan was doing, basically, you know, like allowing us to see conservative talking points, whether they be good or bad, and, you know, evaluate them in the stream instead of just letting them develop in our brain without any critical thought. I don't think that we necessarily need that. I think that people who are, you know, well-informed and good critical thinkers could be able to watch something like Joe Rogan. I know this is a big deal right now, and not walk away with crazy viewpoints, because you'd be able to like critically evaluate the things that they're saying. And if there's anything that set off that little like red flag in your brain, you could research it yourself. But we don't teach critical thinking in schools. It's not something that we are terribly good at. I think that absolutely media critique, media, just critical thinking in general, you know, like being responsible consumers of media is now more important than ever, especially with corporate media dominating, like a profit-driven corporate media dominating the news cycle and how we tell ourselves what's going on in the world. I think it's more important than ever that we do that. And, you know, some people might say, oh, well, you listen to those people, you probably have some crazy ideas from them. And it's like, maybe I do, but like, we have to be able to see both sides and evaluate both sides to be able to come to an idea of truth, even if we don't agree with the other side most of the time, because occasionally they're going to say things that are valid, and we have to determine how valid and like how much weight to put on those things. And I just think it's important because, you know, the difference between me being critical and looking for a broad source of people to cover the news is out of an effort to not let anything slip by me. People who watch like one or two channels and actually believe that those are irrefutable sources or something, you know, I think you're doing it wrong, because you're not seeing the whole picture, and you're also allowing yourself to be manipulated. I just don't think either of those things are good, and I think that especially moving forward, because we don't seem to be fixing any of these problems. They only seem to be getting worse with the media as time goes on. And again, we're going to talk about why that is in a future video, but you know, I really think that it's important, especially for people like me who are covering this stuff and trying to get information out to people, trying to get good information out to people, that we be willing to, instead of jumping on a story and reporting on it as soon as we can with minimal facts, that we should always do research, always wait a day or two for other things to unfold and just see where the story goes before we try to say, well, this is reality. Because especially if it's a new breaking story, you just don't know enough at first to be able to evaluate whether something's real or not, unless you have a tremendous amount of experience covering this type of story in the past. And that has led me to, like, you know, kind of a logical criticism of my own work, but also kind of an illogical bad thoughts feeding themselves in cycles kind of thing. Because I don't think I've really had like a terrible, indefensible take. I don't think I've really had anything that where I've just been proven absolutely wrong. Even with stories that were bullshit, I managed, like Russiagate, right? So I covered Russiagate really early on this channel, and I just covered the Mueller report, and I don't think there's anything wrong with the Mueller report. Like, I guess it could all be lies, but like I think that really the place where we went off the rails as a country, where the media went off the rails, was in speculation. Nobody read the Mueller report. I didn't read the Mueller report. I did a video on the Mueller report. I actually watched like a 12-hour Vice stream of them reading the Mueller report, and I kind of followed along in text. I didn't actually like physically read it myself. I did put in those 8 hours worth of effort for that video, though, and it did actually take more than 8 hours, because I was kind of like, okay, so this page says this thing, this quotation I might want to use, okay, unpause video, let's keep going. You know, that kind of thing. I was taking notes, so it probably took me like 12 hours to watch that video. It's ridiculous. But most people didn't put in that effort, even pundits, because we're talking about like 100 and some page document, and a lot of these pundits are just reporting on what other people are saying, instead of what's actually in the report, or like suspicions. And believe me, like, you could have found the answer if you actually looked at the report. But you know, stuff like that. That was a close call, though, like, because so many people, especially people that I would be more inclined to listen to, had bad takes on Russiagate. Like, there was a time when I watched a lot of Rachel Maddow. And geez, if I had still been on that train, the Rachel Maddow train, just pulling out of the station when I made that video, it would have gone a different way, I'm sure, you know. But I dodged that bullet, but I do consider the OnlyFans story to be a close call, because I almost made that story. I almost propagated the propaganda PR narrative for them. I almost put in work for OnlyFans, and I don't want to do that on any story about anyone. So I guess this is my promise, to at least take a look at the stories that I report on, and try to determine if the person who is telling me this thing is right, if they have a motive for lying to me, or if the person who told them has a motive to lie to us. You know, those sorts of things. Because I think that's important. And especially in a world where people aren't really trained to do this, and where people, you know, maybe because of work, they just don't have time or mental energy to process through this stuff. I think it is important to have people process the news for you in a way, and come back to you with the big stories in the way that I and many other YouTubers do. But that being said, for reasons that I've kind of already gotten into in this video, and for reasons I would get into when I'm talking about mass media, even a YouTuber such as myself, you need to take me with a grain of salt. Like, what if I just missed a part of the picture? I am a fallible human being, and everyone that you watch is, especially smaller channels that may not have the income coming in to hire researchers or editors or that type of stuff that would steer us back in the right direction when we are making a, you know, just a perfectly reasonable or, you know, like non-malicious mistake in our work. But even like bigger channels that actually have research teams, sometimes they just go all in on the bias train. So, you know, those aren't safe either. What I'm saying is, like, I've come to the conclusion over 2021 that there is no safe media. That even the people that I may have trusted in 2020, maybe I trusted them a little bit too much. Maybe I needed to be a little bit more critical. And, you know, again, I feel like I've dodged a bullet, that none of this has, that none of these issues have made it into my work. And it's because I put a lot of time into researching these videos and, you know, make an attempt at being right, regardless of how my audience is going to take that. Because, you know, I think one of the biggest issues is just trying to cater your content to your audience and not make anybody mad. And that comes from trying to sell your channel, trying to market your channel. And, I wish this channel would get big, but I don't want to compromise it to get there faster. You know what I mean? Like, I would rather it just grow slowly and not have to compromise myself than to compromise myself for greater fame and money. It's just who I am. It's how I've been. So yeah, there's that. That's kind of how I see myself in this channel, and kind of my commitment to you, my 1,000+ subscribers. Because, as a part of that depression of coming out of helping my mother and feeling like I had no place to go with my life, or like feeling like there were so many pieces I had to pick up to get back into what I was doing. Because I still have to get back into school. Like, I was going to school for construction related stuff, and then I stopped to help my mom. Just because I couldn't keep up the schedule of school and be there for her as needed, Because a lot of times, like, there are occasions where I had to drive like 8 hours in one day to do a thing that had to be done today so the house could get in place. And like, missing work in school for that. Like, employers aren't flexible anymore. And schools have never been flexible on like how many days you can miss, even for good reasons. So, I just found it easier to forego. But as a part of that, you get to this place where you're like, especially with all that questioning of my own sources, I got scared that, maybe I'm just not good enough for this. Even though I haven't made a mistake yet, it's only a matter of time before one of these PR companies fools me, and I make a bad take. But then I checked on my channel and I saw that my subscribers had risen above 1,000. And that means that over 1,000 people at least have some cursory feeling that my content is worth sticking around for, and that I might make something better, or that I might have made something great, that I might make something even better in the future, and that's worth sticking around to see what happens. And I greatly appreciate you for doing that. And since you've stuck around for like just my personal caterwauling in this video, I'm going to give you a piece of news I don't really want to make a video on necessarily. I did actually have a video script prepared for this before this whole recent thing happened. But, as I'm kind of figuring out where I want to be in the media spectrum, this isn't exactly the type of news that I would like to cover, because it gets a little bit into the tabloidy he said, she said shit. But, let's talk about Whoopi Goldberg. Woo! Or as Internet Today called it, Whoopsie Goldberg, which I fucking love. But here's the thing about the whole Whoopi Goldberg controversy. I don't think either side is right in this. Like, let's just go through it. So, like, I don't watch The View. I haven't even watched this episode. I've seen the clip in question. I know the context, but you ain't getting me to watch The View. It's just not happening. I've seen enough of this episode already, okay? But basically, they were talking about book burnings and bannings and the wave of this. Ironically, by the same people who are pushing this idea that cancel culture must be stopped are now canceling and burning our books. Which is interesting in its own right. But, they were discussing the book Mouse on The View. And personally, read it in college. It's one of the few books that I had to buy for college that I didn't sell back to the school at the end of it to get my money back. I mean, it wasn't worth a lot. It was a paperback book. I mean, come on. But I really enjoyed the book. I thought it was really great. Because first of all, it's a graphic novel. So that, for one, makes it, like, more entertaining than, like, reading The Diary of Anne Frank. Not saying that's not an important book or anything, but, it's more fun to read. And when you're talking about such dense, painful content as talking about a Jewish narrative during the Holocaust, you need something, right? You need something, because otherwise it's just like a sadistic torture reading what was done to these people, because it was horrible. And this makes it a little bit more interesting, a little bit more palatable for people to read, a little bit more entertaining, perhaps. And I'm really sad to hear that this book is being banned, and apparently they got into a conversation of why this might be, and Whoopi dropped the bomb that was saying that the Holocaust was not about race. which is wrong. It was. But also, people who are criticizing her, many of them are saying that it was completely about race. That it was purely racist. I don't think that's right either. And I think that both of these takes are a reflection of the American educational system. I'm not sure how the Holocaust is taught all over the world, but it is taught really poorly here. Because we tend to go more the racist route. We tend to go more the 6 million Jews. Like, that's what everyone has remembered about the Holocaust. But a lot of people died. Like, there was a fucking war. The Nazis killed a lot of soldiers, that weren't Jewish. They killed a lot of other ethnic groups. They killed the disabled. They killed the people who didn't score high enough on an IQ test. They killed the gay. They killed the trans because they thought that they were mentally ill. They killed anyone who they thought was mentally ill. They even killed the poor because they thought that they were genetically incapable of fitting into society, and that's why they were poor. Like, there's just a lot of scientificized racism within eugenics and within, like, the precursor phrenology. It's not entirely about race. It's more about genes. Although, you could point out the eugenics movement happened well before we had mapped the human genome, before we really understood human genetics, which we still don't, on the level that we would have to be able to, say, even manipulate a child's eye color, right? We still don't get that. So basically what they were doing was establishing a pseudoscience to reinforce their roughly white supremacist beliefs. So yeah, they were racist, they were white supremacist, but the Holocaust was not entirely about race. I mean, I kind of get the point that Whoopi tries to make on Colbert. I really think that she's just weaseling her way out of a bad take by trying to say, well, no, I mean, it's not race, it's like ethnicity. And yeah, that probably... Bear with me a second. That probably is more accurate to say that it was about ethnicity because, a lot of these were ethnic groups. Although you could also look at the fact that at the time, I'm not sure that there was a broad consensus that Jewish people were considered white. Even at the turn of the 20th century, we didn't largely consider Italians to be white, right? But there were certainly groups of white people, as she said, that they targeted, but it wasn't entirely groups of white people. There were definitely other races. And again, our race is not a specific set of skin colors as we tend to view it here in America. And she kind of made this point on Colbert too, and that was kind of her blind spot. And she's right. That is a blind spot that she holds. And you know what? I applaud her for recognizing it and having the guts to say that on national television, especially after what had happened previously. Now, naturally, the internet didn't like this take either. And again, I think she's just kind of backing out of what she said and saying it in a different way, trying to play a semantics game. But here's why I think that ultimately we're doing ourselves a disservice by teaching the Holocaust as being purely about Nazis wanting to kill Jews. Yes, that was a big component as far as the ethnic groups and groups that were killed by the Nazis. The Jews were by far the biggest group, but they were not the only group. They weren't even, I should probably look up statistics on this, but a live video, and I'm doing this off the cuff, but maybe I'll work in the actual total number of people killed in the Holocaust somewhere on the bottom of the screen down here, in the edit. Maybe that'll be the only edit that I do. But 6 million, yes, it's a big number, but it's not everybody. It excludes a lot of people who weren't killed for racial reasons. They killed communists. Despite communism not being a race, they killed quote-unquote morons, after forcing them to take IQ tests. Morons are not a race. It was actually a scientific term to geneticize stupidity, basically. If you're a moron, which we can prove with an IQ test, that means that your genes are so inferior that they shouldn't be passed on at all. So the Holocaust did this to a lot of people, and the reason I think that America, and especially the American school system, has this codified way of teaching it primarily as being an assault on the Jews is that this allows us to escape the fact that in the United States, we practiced eugenics into, I think, the 1980s in certain states. I know the state that I'm personally from practiced it until 1979. So within a decade or two of when I was being taught about the Holocaust, my state was practicing eugenics. Now, what eugenics looked like in the United States wasn't necessarily what it looked like in Germany. They had death camps. They were very violent and brutal in the way that they were removing these people from the gene pool. We were nicer about it, in that we didn't execute people to remove them from the gene pool. What we did was we locked them away, or we sterilized them. I brought this up to my mother once, and she told me that there was a young black woman who was mentally ill. A friend of hers, actually, like not so out of her gourd that you couldn't be friends with her, but she was a little special, a little funny. And that she found out that this woman was taken in the 1970s to a sterilization center, and, because of maybe her skin color, but also probably the mental acuity, because again, remember, eugenics wasn't just a framework of racism. It was used by racists to do racist things, sure, but it also included, like using the IQ test to determine if someone's a moron, because if someone's a moron, then under eugenics, they shouldn't be allowed to breed, and you should remove them from the gene pool. Again, this could mean sterilizing them, and the Germans sterilized a lot of people, but ultimately they determined that it was easier to just kill them. We never quite got that far into eugenics, fortunately. But the fact that eugenics was a thing that we were doing even 30 and 40 years after we said we had learned the lessons of the Holocaust is terrifying. Especially because we are starting to get to a point in genetic technology where we might be able to edit genomes. We might be able to start creating designer babies, We're certainly a lot closer than they were then. Like I said before, we still don't necessarily have enough knowledge to know what genes we would have to manipulate to change a baby's eye color. And if we can't do basic stuff like that, it's difficult. But I can foresee sometime in my future a new rise of a eugenics movement, right? Because if you gloss over all the racist aspects, eugenics sounds like a utopian ideology, like the perfect human race. We're all genetically superior, all that stuff. And, maybe we even sell this as like, no matter what your genes are now, we can fix them in the next generation. But if you still have the same type of people running that show, that's just going to lead to blonde hair, blue-eyed babies. You know what I mean? Like popping out of black people. Like, oh, we fixed everything that was wrong with your genes. You changed the skin color and eye color and hair color of my child. I'm not sure that's an improvement. Oh, it is. Believe us. Are you sure you're not racist? Oh, definitely not racist. No, we just believe in good genes. Yeah, that's it. And you've determined that my brown eyes, brown hair, and brown skin were bad genes? Yeah. So tell me how you're not racist? I'll get back to you on that. So, that's kind of the eugenics movement that I see coming, and we would understand the racism part of that because that is something that we are very aware of here in America. Even when people don't want to be. Such as conservatives, like they have to acknowledge that racism is a thing, even if they have to deny it. I'm sure they understand somewhere in their heart that it is real. So, what I'm getting at here is, I feel like America taught the Holocaust this way to obfuscate the fact that we were doing many of the same things as the Germans, just not to the brutal degree. Instead of killing people to remove them from the gene pool, we were sterilizing people to remove them from the gene pool. And that is fucked up too. That is just a fundamental violation of human rights that is worth the crying. And we have never really had a moment in America where we either owned up to doing that or were chastised for it. It's gone largely under the record. It's undiscussed, but it was shockingly common throughout the United States, even during the Holocaust. And because we had such a long relationship with eugenics, an even longer relationship with the eugenics movement, both starting before and ending after Germany, that it really scares me that there might be a revival of that based on the American ignorance of what eugenics really was, right? Because if you've never heard of this before, if you've only heard of the Holocaust as being about the death of 6 million Jews, if you don't know what eugenics is, then that leaves an opening for someone to bring eugenics into America in the future without the proper backlash that such a movement should get. I guess, unless we label it as racist and then everyone understands. I don't know. I just think that we're doing the nation a disservice in the way that we really gloss over the details of what made the Holocaust not only a horrible event, but a horrible event that absolutely could be repeated in the United States. Because, if there is one great lesson to learning history, it is learning mistakes that should not be repeated. Especially when those mistakes were readily accepted by an entire population of people. Like if a lot of Germany got behind this whole eugenics idea, as well as the UK and America, if so many people were behind this idea, then maybe we should be a little bit more worried that it might have a resurgence. I mean, Nazism is having a resurgence. So why wouldn't eugenics, which is, I guess, easier to like Nazism is obviously abhorrent. Eugenics can be sold as utopian. It is bad in any respect. Eventually we might get to the point where we can actually remove real scientifically discovered genetic flaws in people, preventing disease in advance. All that stuff sounds great, but it depends on who's running it, because what makes genes good is probably very variable to whom you ask. Some people like tall women, some people like short women. I'm just saying. Some people like black people, some people fucking hate them for no reason. I'm just saying, it really depends on who is setting the standards for what good genetics is, to whether or not this could actually work without a huge human cost. And if we aren't aware of our history with eugenics, how that created German eugenics. We gave them the idea. And how even after Germany was chastised and beaten down by the entire world for practicing eugenics, we kept going. I think that's important to understand. Because when you understand that, you understand that this is something that we must vanguard against happening in the future. In the same way that we have to oppose fascism, we also have to oppose ideas that scoot closer and closer to eugenics. Because no matter how it's sold to us, it's probably being sold to us by a racist. Just saying. Even if they believe that they are a scientifically justified racist, right? Like the phrenology and eugenics movements of the past were. Like, we don't hate black people, we just think they're inferior. Like, in fact, we love them. We would love to fix their inferiority and make them ideal humans. It's just such a disgusting ideology. And I feel like not enough people understand that. So, here we are, explaining to people why eugenics is something that we absolutely must avoid in our future, no matter how good the pitch might sound. And, I just wish that one or many of my teachers had ever said this to me during a Holocaust class. I wish they said it to everyone, because I'm kind of scared that this is a piece of knowledge that we will have to know in the future, and that when it comes time to know it, there might not be enough people to speak up. And that's how Holocausts really start. So, wow. I took a celebratory video about 1,000 subscribers and turned it into a lesson on the Holocaust. Great! But if you did find that informative, if you found that to be a lot more interesting than the lack of nuance in the takes in the media, then hey, join my 1,000 subscribers. and, you know, maybe just like the video at the very least. I usually don't tell people to do that, so I'm actually kind of surprised so many people have subscribed. Apparently you have to tell people to do that. Maybe more people would subscribe if I told you to. Like, hey, if you're still watching, it's been 40 minutes of this shit now. You should probably subscribe if you know, you can put up with me. Let's do this. Let's be a team. Audience, creator. Let's do this shit. Until next time.